Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns 24/7, joined as always by our fearless leader, the managing editor of Horns 24/7, Taylor Estes. Taylor, how you doing?
Chip, I'm doing well, but I don't think I'm doing as well as you're about to be doing because somebody this week is going on their honeymoon to Mexico. How are you
How?
doing? You ready for that?
I mean, I'm just thankful that Cancun is not at level 4 with this Omicron. So fingers crossed, knock on wood, that everything will go according to plan and not not have any unsuspecting surprises. Let's put
Yeah,
it
for
that
sure.
way.
You'll have fun though. I bet you'll enjoy. I've been to the resort that you're going to. It's awesome. So you'll have fun.
Well, um, we're going down for Hootie Fest. Hootie and the Blowfish, Bare Naked Ladies, Spin Doctors. It's a 90s music fest. So excited. We'll see how it goes. But I'll have a full report next week
Yes, can't wait to hear about it.
upon the return. But Taylor, we are recording right here at the end of January on Tuesday, and football workouts are in full swing. And I'm told that the second workout after everyone enrolled in class and started class on the 18th was close to 3 hours long. It was the hardest workout a bunch of players could remember. And it seems like we always have that workout that we talk about. And then the following day was like the coldest day because they're doing these workouts in DKR. And so the third workout upon their return was in 30-degree weather. And so, hey, 6:30 a.m. It's let's go. And Texas football's been, putting out little video snippets of the workouts, guys, pulling sleds with weights on them and all that kind of stuff. But the good news is everyone who's supposed to be reporting is on campus. So, um, and all eyes on Quinn Ewers. We've talked about the early enrollees. Now you've got Bama tight end Jaleel Billingsley and Wyoming transfer receiver Isaiah Nayer as a part of these mid-year enrollees.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's a huge deal that they got Billingsley and Isaiah Nayer in time for spring because one of the things, Chip, you go back to, last winter and last offseason and last spring for Texas, they didn't have some of their transfer players in. They came in after the semester was over with. So they didn't really have the chance to really build the rapport with the team before even spring football, before, summer workouts, the 7-on-7 and stuff that they do during the summer and fall camp. So I think that this is big, but it's a good sign too, because there's no denying that there is a lack of depth both at, tight end and wide receiver right now. I mean, there's some, up and comers at tight end position, some of the guys that they signed last year. However, they're still really raw and they're really green. And so having, the addition of two experienced veteran type of players at positions of need were huge. And I really think the Isaiah Nayer one's a really big one too, because as you've reported, Troy O'Meary has not been cleared yet to go through spring or through offseason conditioning yet. So that's another person at receiver that Texas is missing right now. So getting both of them, I think, was crucial, and I think that's an early win for Steve Sarkisian and the staff.
Yeah, I think the Isaiah Nayer news, him signing and enrolling, is new since our podcast last week, and it's big time. I mean, and I think it's big time on a couple of levels. It's big time in that he's a 6'3" long-armed receiver who can go up and make contested catches. That's the thing that stood out to me the most on his film. He was a 2-star recruit out of Arlington Lamar. who goes to Wyoming and doesn't, you know, get much of an opportunity. The COVID season, only 5 games, all that, and then he explodes this past season with over 800 yards receiving, 12 touchdown catches, and the thing that stands out is his ability to to fight off defensive backs, make contested catches, make tough catches, which is just something that's been lacking at Texas. I mean, it's pathetic, honestly. And there were some big time contested catches that needed to be made. I'm thinking of the Baylor game,
Mhm.
right there at the end where Casey Thompson, throws it to Marcus Washington. It's a 50-50 ball, and Texas doesn't come down with it. And those are the kind of catches that Texas absolutely has to make. I mean, they've got the burner in Xavier Worthy, but they've got to have a guy that if it's close, the quarterback can throw it and have confidence that his guy's going to come down with it. And I think that Nair gives them a chance for that. And so, and the second level that I think it's big time, Taylor, is Brennan Marion, the new
Mhm.
receivers coach, staying on this recruitment, even though Isaiah Nair was committed to Tennessee, and Brennan Marion, helping to swing that commitment right before the mid-year enrolling period. So that's big time, and I think what's ironic is that Nair is kind of the blue collar guy that Andre Coleman, probably would have liked, but he's proven himself now at the college level. So he's obviously a much higher, you know, a bigger target, a bigger prospect in the transfer portal than when he came out of Arlington Lamar. But
Yeah.
uh, that's a nice piece of work from Brennan Marion.
Yeah, early too. I mean, Brendan Marion, didn't join the staff. He wasn't announced until the end of December, so he's been on the job for less than a month, and that's a crucial addition that he was able to add. And Chip and I were talking about this before we started recording when we're talking about the receivers who you can trust to make those contested catches, those 50-50 balls. Texas really hasn't had that since Colin Johnson, Lil Jordan Humphrey, and Devin Duvernay. I mean, the three of them were I know that some people may think that, Colin Johnson may not have panned out as well as people expected or whatever they may say. However, he was one of those guys, same with Lil Jordan Humphrey, same with Devin Duvernay, I know that Sam Ellinger trusted when he threw the ball to them. He knew that they were going to come down with it more times than they weren't. And, Texas has lacked that. I think a lot of people expected that out of Brennan Eagles, before he left for the NFL, but that's a guy that never really panned out a receiver too. So, there's no denying that Texas needs those type of players. I think that the Texas offense, it'll be interesting to see under Steve Sarkisian, because we're talking about that under a totally different offensive scheme by Tom Herman when we're talking about the Colin Johnsons and Lil Jordan Humphreys and Devin Duvernays. But, it doesn't hurt to have big guys at receiver as well. You need speed, obviously, in Steve Sarkisian's offense. That's what he looks for. But having guys that are reliable and can, fight off a defensive back for a ball is something that's been lacking for Texas in the last, I'd say, probably 2 years. And this is big. And then if this is any indication of what Brendan Marion can do as a recruiter at Texas, look out, because this is, Chip, I mean, this is something that the type of addition that Xavier Worthy, in a sense, was, to Steve Sarkisian last year. And so him being able to get on the job that quickly and get in the mix there, I think is a good sign for the receiver recruiting moving forward. And the receiver recruiting, under Andre Coleman was one of the biggest problems I think that Texas has faced on the offense side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the fact that they had receivers committed who they ended up losing, Evan Stewart, Armani Wingfield, um, and look, there that may be blessing in disguise. You have no idea, but the bottom line is, and they obviously have Brendan Thompson coming in, who's a speedster, but he's not an early enrollee, and so there's excitement that maybe another freshman like Brendan Thompson could have a breakout season like Xavier Worthy did as a true freshman this past year, freshman All American, broke all the records at Texas, amazing. But you had to bring in talent at the receiver position in the portal. You knew you had to do that, and I think Isaiah Nayer is a really good place to start here. And look, I think this coaching staff is gonna keep a scholarship or two in their pocket for post spring decisions, and so we'll see what else they can add because honestly, they need to add more at
Yeah.
the receiver position because right now, if you drew up your depth chart, your way too early depth chart, you'd have Xavier Worthy, Jordan Whittington, and probably Isaiah Nayer
Hmm.
as your top three receivers because even though Marcus Washington's still on the roster, or Brennan Thompson, we just haven't seen it from Marcus Washington yet. So it's been so up and down. So this was a really big pickup for Texas, and I think again, that long, 6'3", but long armed, and that just expands the wingspan, the catch radius for a receiver, and I just like this kid's chip on his shoulder, like his drive, like the fact that he's coming home to Texas to play, and there's big time opportunity for him.
Yeah, and I mean, I always love the stories of the former 2 stars that come out and, obviously Wyoming Wyoming is a little bit of a different, caliber of program and the, competition that he faced last season there, but still, as you mentioned, 12 touchdown receptions, you can't blow that off at all, and so I love the underdog, I love the diamond in the roughs that actually pan out. I think Texas fans got used to seeing that at Baylor when Art Briles was the head coach. It seemed like they always had these skill players, these receivers, especially that were the diamonds in the rough. And then all of a sudden they are all Americans and, being coached up that way. So, yeah, I think this was a huge get for Texas and especially, to flip the commitment from Tennessee and then get him to sign and get him on campus. I mean, that in itself was huge. When we look at what Texas could potentially also do in the transfer portal chip, I'm kind of curious for your take on this because while I definitely think Texas still is in need of some depth at receiver, the offensive line depth still remains a question, I think, and adding if there are offensive linemen that can be instant impact type of guys in the portal, I almost think that Texas has to go after them, even if it's after spring ball, because I mean, the reality is Texas signed a really elite offensive line and defensive line class, obviously in the 2022 early signing period, and they're still in the mix, with Devin Campbell, the 5-star, who's expected to sign or make his commitment and sign the second signing period in February. But they're still relying on true freshmen. I mean, that's great to bring those guys in, but you don't necessarily want to have to rely on the true freshman offensive lineman if you can avoid it. And so that's something I think Texas still needs to probably scour the transfer portal for offensive line additions that can make an instant impact. But I don't know. I mean, what if you were Steve Sarkisian, you're looking at this, what would you put ahead of the other receiver, O line, or even maybe safety? What would be your
Yeah, I
pick?
mean, yeah, safety, linebacker,
Mhm.
but I would I would say O line. If you could bring in one veteran offensive lineman, preferably with um, 2 years of eligibility, but even if it's just one, if you know that this guy's a stud, like when Tom Herman brought in, um, you know,
Calvin
uh,
Anderson,
yeah,
Parker
Calvin
Braun.
Anderson and Parker Braun,
Mhm.
and those guys were plug-in starters. That's what you need. I mean, that's what you need because Texas has to upgrade its tackle positions. I think they're okay at center with Jake Majors. I think they're okay with Junior Angalau at guard, but they have to upgrade the tackle positions. And so, Christian Jones, um, Andre Carrick, those guys need to be in an intense position battle with someone other than Kelvin Banks come June,
Yeah.
because you got to have depth. You've got to have depth at those positions, and you just don't. You're right. I mean, Sarkisian talked about having been on a team where they had 3 freshman offensive linemen. You can get away with that at a place like USC or Alabama, um, when you're recruiting, 5 stars. And think about this: the Brockermeyers were on scout team this year at Alabama.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, Tommy's the highest ranked offensive line recruit in 2020. He's on scout team against Will Anderson.
Yeah.
And James Brockermeyer, um, who's probably going to be their next big thing at center scout team. So that tells you where Texas is and where they have to go. And
Yeah.
so I agree with you. I think they need a veteran offensive lineman. If I had to put that first on my portal priorities, veteran offensive lineman, and um, you know, a veteran safety. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd like to have some more experience back there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And the the one thing with receiver and a lot of positions can be this way. You can oftentimes see the field a lot earlier. However, when it comes to like offensive linemen, quarterbacks too, if you missed our interview edition of the Flagship podcast on Monday with former Westlake head coach and former Texas quarterback Todd Dodge, he talked about you know it's not in the best interest for your program if you're relying on a true freshman quarterback. And I do think that if you're relying on multiple true freshman offensive line, that's probably also not in the best interest of the future of your program as well. So yeah, I think that I agree with you on safety. I mean that's a position of need. It was a position of need last year. I mean the safeties were play at safety. Not to bash on BJ Foster or Brendan Schooler, but it was mediocre at best at times. And bad the other times, and Texas really needs to they obviously have some guys there. There's Jaron Thompson returning. There's options, but I do think that adding, some more help in the back end of the defense does not hurt Texas in the slightest either.
Yeah, and quarterback.
Yeah.
We've
Mhm.
talked about how Steve Sarkisian's initial plan was to bring in um, a young quarterback, Quinn Ewers, and an experienced quarterback, who I think was Miles Brennan, and Miles Brennan decided to stay at LSU. And and so, Todd Dodge saying you don't want to have a first year player starting at quarterback. Um, Quinn Ewers is a first year player. I mean, he's a
Yeah.
first year player in this offense. And we've talked about this. This offense is a lot. There's all kinds of motions, protection stuff that other offenses don't have because they don't, use all that deception to try to figure out what the defense is doing. Steve Sarkisian uses it all and likes to have it all, wants his players to be able to consume it all. Um, he's not a guy who's like, we want to be simple. No, that's
No.
that's not him. He wants it to be NFL, um, an NFL offense. And so that I'm not going to lie. I mean, I think everyone assumes Quinn Ewers is going to roll in here, pick up the offense super fast, and throw footballs like Trevor Lawrence. I think Trevor Lawrence is a unicorn. I think Bryce Young is a unicorn. We'll see. We'll see. Listen,
Right.
I think it would be amazing, because we talk about it all the time. Vince Young, he's the highest rated quarterback since Vince Young. Vince Young redshirted and had some struggles in 2003 before it all clicked and he took off like a rocket in 2004 and 2005. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind, because I mean Texas is at 27 in this 2022 class. That's getting right up to the brim, and so now it's you still have O'Shawn Mathis out there,
Mhm.
a proven pass rusher who's in the portal, who has a lot of respect for Gary Patterson and is seen as a guy Texas could land. So this is going to be really interesting to see how these coaches, they'll fight for their guy, and if the scholarship numbers are getting down to the nubs, which they are, it'll be interesting to see who wins the battle to land what's left of the space in this 2022 class for a portal edition.
Yeah, for sure. And you bring up, mentioning quarterback. Another thing that Chip reported in the Brew on, I think it was on Monday that you reported it, is true freshman early enrollee quarterback Malik Murphy is currently in a walking boot from an injury that he suffered in the state championship win. Before he made it over to Texas. So that's another guy right now. I mean, Chip, what's the latest that you're hearing on his return?
Yeah, so Malik Murphy, suffered that injury in the fourth quarter of the California state title game that he helped his team win, and I'm told it's still, he's still a week or two away from being able to, really get into these workouts. So that's he can still be in meetings, he can still do everything he needs to do to learn the offense right now, but his conditioning will be a little bit further behind some of the others heading into spring football because he's still getting over that ankle injury that he suffered last month in the state championship game. But it's Hudson Card is the veteran quarterback. To me,
Right.
he's the starter. He's the guy until someone else beats him out. And so I think, um, to and I agree, Taylor. I think everyone should listen to the Todd Dodge interview because he's very open and candid. And remember, his son Riley Dodge is the one who coached Quinn Ewers at South Lake Carroll. Um, when Westlake and South Lake Carroll went at it for the 2020 state championship, which turned out to be Quinn Ewers' last start as a quarterback. Now, it'll be 2 years when he takes the field this fall. But that, he talks about how you don't want a first year quarterback to be your starter. Steve Sarkisian doesn't like that either, but it may be where we are, or Hudson Card takes, a big step and maybe starts off the season as the starting quarterback. Kind of like what I said last year, I would have started Casey Thompson just to let him go to Arkansas and face that because he's been, he started a game on the road away from home, whatever, in the Alamo, or not, he didn't even start that game. He started
Yeah.
the second half of that game.
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to say it right now. I would expect Hudson Card to be the starter, especially with Alabama, UTSA sitting there in weeks 2 and 3, unless Quinn Ewers is just tearing it up in camp and has full command of the offense and has great rapport with these receivers already, which is possible, but
It is. Yeah.
you just don't want to make that the expectation because if he's struggling to pick up the offense or all the things that go with it, the last thing you want to do is rush him out there and then have him go through failure
Yeah.
and see if he can handle that because we know this is it's a microscope here.
Yeah, and Todd Dodge talked about he knows what it's like to be booed by 80,000 people, he said. And you
Pre-game.
know, pregame, yeah, and that's a different, that it's a different beast, especially if you're the starting quarterback. I mean, every coach says this and everyone probably hears it and is like that's just coach speak, but it's very true. Quarterbacks get way more credit a lot of times than they deserve, and they get way more criticism a lot of times than they deserve. Sometimes they do. I mean, even look at, the NFL playoffs this past weekend, the slate, except for the last game between Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, the other quarterback ratings were not great. But everyone's talking about Joe Burrow. Everyone's talking about, the guys that won. And it's like his QBR was not really good, but still, I mean, that's a very good sign. A lot of times quarterbacks get way more credit and they also get way more criticism. So in a place like Texas where I mean, Sam Ellinger has been the most consistent quarterback and brought the most consistent QB play to the table since Colt McCoy. I don't really think a lot of Texas fans expected that to be the case. I mean, it took him a while to get that Texas offer. He had to camp at Texas quite a few times before he did get offered by Texas. And once he did, obviously, that was the end. Everyone knew he wasn't going to go anywhere else. I think a lot of coaches really stopped recruiting him because they knew that he wanted to be the quarterback at Texas. So, but I don't think a lot of people expected him to turn into what he ended up turning into. So,
And he struggled as a
he did.
first-year quarterback.
Yeah, yeah, and that's another sign. I mean, 20 you go back to the 2017 season, you think about how good the defense played in a lot of those games, but then you look at, like, the Oklahoma State game, for instance, that went to overtime, and what was the final score? Like 13-10 or something and it ended with Sam Ellinger, struggling there, and
Getting
USC.
intercepted when he coulda
Yeah,
kicked a field goal.
yeah, and that USC, same thing, that 2017 season. So, and even though, I thought one thing, Chip, that Todd Dodge mentioned, and, we've kind of talked about this, and I think it's something that Texas fans, hearing it from a coach is probably better than hearing it from you and me. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
but him talking about not only not needing to rely or not, it's not ideal or in the best interest of the program to rely on a true freshman. He also considers Quinn Ewers still a true freshman quarterback. He doesn't consider him a redshirt freshman because he, technically would have been a true freshman early enrollee in the 2022 recruiting class had he not reclassified. And, he didn't go through the full offseason at Ohio State. He, enrolled there in August. So really his experience at the college level is very minimum still. I mean, 4 months basically is what he knows about the college, game. So it wouldn't hurt Texas in any way if Hudson Card, is the guy to start the season, as you mentioned, and having to play Alabama, having to play UTSA. I mean, gosh, you have to think back. Whoever scheduled that game back in the day was probably like, "Oh, that's an easy win," and now look at UTSA. But I think that it doesn't hurt Texas in any way if Hudson Card is the starter at the beginning of the season. And again, going back to what Todd Dodge said too, it's if we consider Quinn Ewers a true freshman, why do you want to possibly make him, turn into a shell of himself of what his talent? Because when you listen to that interview, he compares Quinn Ewers throwing and everything about him. He compares to Aaron Rodgers. That's a pretty good comparison, and you probably don't want to, risk the chance of hurting, his confidence or anything if he goes into the games too early, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, it's gonna be fascinating because, um, while you have this excitement over Quinn Ewers in the early, talking to team sources, he's really been laid back and cool, not, coming in trying to take charge of everything. Any presupposition that he would be cocky coming into Texas, that has not been the case from what I'm hearing. He's been, all work, head down, listening and and getting to know his teammates before trying to, um, you know, take over as a leader. Although when he talks, people listen because he's the quarterback, and
Yeah.
so it's going to be fascinating. Steve Sarkisian, the quarterback guru, he's developed some good ones. I think everyone's excited to see what he can do with Quinn Ewers, but year one, you got to expect some turbulence.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, Quinn Ewers may come in and light the world on fire, and you and I will both be like, he should have started. I mean, it's just the unknown right now. I think that the hype always a lot of times I feel like takes over what the unknown is when it comes to getting these type of elite type of players. And so, there's obviously a lot of hype behind him. And I liked what you wrote in the Brew this week, talking about through sources about his demeanor with the team and everything. Because I feel like in watching the recruitment of Quinn Ewers once he entered the transfer portal, it was almost like a lot of people were painting him into this picture of being like a diva of some sort, or just is all about the money. And you never heard Quinn Ewers talking about it, though. You never heard that coming from his side of the spectrum. I think that people just, they looked at him because he was such an elite recruit, had such a unique first year at the college level by reclassifying and, enrolling at Ohio State. Reports of him making $1 million in NIL money at Ohio State in just the 4 months that he was there. I mean, I feel like a lot of that is probably the outside perspective of him more so than what we're hearing, from internally. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. You want to have a quarterback that obviously when they open their mouth, the team listens, but you don't want it to be an unproven showboat type of guy that comes in and, cocky and thinking that, the that his what doesn't stink. Like that's I feel like not what Quinn Ewers is, but he was almost being painted into that light by external people. So I think it's really good to hear that is not the case, at least early in these winter workouts.
Yeah. Yeah. First impressions are big.
Mm.
And I think he's making a good first impression on his teammates because, like you said, there's a lot of noise around Quinn Ewers, and his teammates hear it too.
Yeah.
They need to see what he's all about, and so far, it sounds like he's handled himself um, really well, and it's been easy for teammates to digest him into the fold. So obviously, Taylor, you know, the uh, the excitement for winter workouts, guys running, is off the charts. Texas basketball. I know some some Texas fans are, they don't know what to do with this team, and I would just say that, Texas hasn't played Baylor or Kansas yet. They're going to play Tennessee this weekend against Rick Barnes, you know, UT's Final Four coach, and that's going to be wild because it's in the Irwin Center, and Tennessee is a ranked opponent, and um, according to the NCAA net rankings, which replaced the RPI as a evaluation tool for the NCAA tournament committee. Tennessee is number 11. So this is a great opportunity for Texas to get that marquee win that they don't have on the schedule yet. And then next week, you're at Texas Tech for that whole whatever that's going to be.
A
Um,
very warm welcome, I bet, for Chris
oh,
Beard, right?
like I'm nervous. I'm going to love it, and I'm nervous.
Don't get your foot
Uh,
run over again like you
oh
did that
my
one time.
gosh. Because look, Tech fans, man, they are in your face. They are in your face. So and they've got a great atmosphere there that Chris Beard helped build.
Mhm.
And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but it's going to be a monster February for Texas basketball. They're going to play Baylor twice. They're going to play Tech twice. They'll play Kansas for the first time. And so this is uh, this is going to be where you want your team to start peaking, where they need to start looking like a March, factor, a team that can do something in the postseason. That's going to happen over the next 30 days. So I think people are frustrated, and I get it. They shouldn't have lost to K-State at home. They were up 5 with 3 minutes left and got outscored 6-0 over the final 3:32 and lost the game. That's a tough one. But this team can still get better, needs to get better, and should, you would think, rise to the occasion against those teams that are considered better than them. So I think it's going to be a really crucial 10 days here for this Texas basketball team to make sure that arrow starts going up and stays up.
Yeah, and I liked what Chris Beard said after the Oklahoma State game. He said, "Everyone can rustle it up after a loss. Only champions get better after a win." And that's what you want to see from Texas right now. You want to see them getting better from these wins and not, having the high moments only to fall off the cliff, the next game. And that's it's kind of what we say about football too. The sign of a good team is week to week improvement. And in basketball, I think the sign of a good team is game to game improvement, not necessarily week to week because they play multiple games a week. But I think that's what people are wanting to see from Texas right now. And now it's time to answer because this is a crucial time. And they need to keep this, they need to find some consistency and keep a rhythm going for them as they make it, through February, Chip, because you're right. I mean, they literally end the season with Baylor. Who was it? Baylor first, and then Kansas, I believe. Um,
Yeah, their
yeah,
final game of the season is at Kansas.
yeah, at Kansas, and that comes, a few days after they have to play Baylor just to end the regular season. And right now, the Big 12 is probably one of the stronger conferences, I think, in college basketball. I mean, from top to bottom, it's hard to take games off, I'd say, and not with every team, but still, I do think that this is a conference right now that is playing at a really high and elite level, and you don't want to be the ones tapping the brakes when the other ones are hitting the gas here. And so I think that this is it's going to be it's going to be really interesting to watch and to play out. But that Texas Tech game, my goodness, I'm kind of jealous of you that you're going to that because I would love to see what that is like in person. It's going to be madness. I imagine.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because Mark Adams, who of course was an assistant to Beard at Tech and then was promoted to head coach, brought in 5 transfers of his own, um, and including Bryson Williams, who played for Rodney Terry, the Texas assistant coach, who was the head coach at UTEP, played at
Mm.
UTEP last year. He's now Tech's leading scorer. There are a lot of storylines to this one that fly under the radar a little bit, but um, Tech is going to be out of its mind, pumped for that game with the energy that the students are going to give them. And let's see how Texas handles that atmosphere
Yeah.
because they've they've got to be tough on the road. You've got to steal some games on the road to have a chance to win the Big 12 regular season championship, put yourself in position for a high seeding in the Big 12 tournament, and get the NCAA committee to give you a higher seed. Right now, Texas is seen as a 6 or even a 7 seed, and they got to improve that resume.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's going to be fun to watch for sure, Chip. And a little teaser for next week, we will have Jarrett Johnson from InsideTheRedRaiders.com, part of the 24/7 Sports Network. He will be joining us to preview somewhat, this game between Texas and Texas Tech that will drop on Monday. The day before that game tips off. So definitely keep an eye for that because he has a very good breakdown and a good feel of where this Texas Tech team is, entering this game and how the fan base is feeling about this game. So it's definitely going to be a schedule, mark your calendar, scheduled listening type of interview this coming Monday with Jarrett Johnson from InsideTheRedRaiders.com.
Yeah, and real quickly on Tennessee, um, they're the only team that's beaten Arizona. Arizona's the number 3 team in the country. Tennessee's the only team that's beat them. So, Tech beat Tennessee earlier in the year in a really weird game at Madison Square Garden, 57-52. Neither team could get into anything offensively, but Tech just, grounded out and just played tough. And so this will be a great little barometer of where Texas is when they take on Tennessee, heading into that Texas Tech game on Tuesday of next week. All right, Taylor, you ready for some love it or leave it?
I am. Before we get to Love It or Leave It, we're going to take a really quick break, but stick around. We will talk more about Texas football and some Longhorns in the NFL here that are still in the mix for playing for a Super Bowl. So stay tuned. We will be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on here to Love It or Leave It. Before we get to Love It or Leave It, I want to make a mention. If you listen to the Flagship podcast on Spotify, Spotify actually just recently put out a rating system to rate your favorite podcast. So if you're a Spotify, listener on the Flagship podcast, feel free to go over, give us a 5-star rating. Our bosses would really like that, and it would really help us to continue to grow and expand this show, Chip. So with that said,
Absolutely.
yeah, you ready for some love it or leave it?
Let's do it.
Alrighty, my first one is love it or leave it. Signing Wyoming transfer wide receiver Isaiah Nayer will end up being as important as Texas getting Xavier Worthy to flip from Michigan last year.
Ugh, well, now that we know what Xavier Worthy did, um, I'm going to leave this just because I don't want anyone thinking that Isaiah Nayer can come in and do what Xavier Worthy did. I think Xavier Worthy is a special talent, um, but it's hugely important because let's be honest. I mean, you've got to have you can't let defenses just double Xavier Worthy all game long, and
Mhm.
then you're having to rely on Jordan Whittington and Brennan Thompson. I mean, having a long armed 6'3" receiver who can run, who's able to make those contested catches. I'm going to leave this, but this is huge. I mean, to me, this ended up being a really big, recruiting win for Brennan Marion, for Steve Sarkisian, because when Nayer committed to Tennessee, I was like, ooh, wow, with all that opportunity at
Right.
Texas in Steve Sarkisian's offense, a kid from Texas is going to go to Tennessee. And I think getting Brennan Marion in as the receivers coach, letting him go to work, talk about how he just coached the Bolitnikoff Award winner at Pitt. I think it got Isaiah Nayer, his full attention, and here he is now at Texas. So huge signing for Texas to bring in a kid with 12 touchdown catches from the year before, because that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen in every program. Taylor, how about you?
Yeah, I don't want to underestimate how crucial of an addition this is, especially at a position of need for some playmakers. I mean, you look back at last season, Chip. I mean, Xavier Worthy obviously led the receivers, and then it was Jordan Whittington and Bijan Robinson. Jordan Whittington only played in 8 games. Robinson's a running back and he played in 10 games, and yet they were number 2 and number 3 in the receiving category at Texas last season. That goes to show where the position was, the wide receiver position is. So adding Nayer is obviously a big addition. However, in saying that, I agree. I have to leave it because we I don't think anyone necessarily expected Xavier Worthy to have the type of season that he did. I knew it was a huge get for Texas. He brought the speed that Steve Sarkisian really looks for at the position, and you knew he was going to be an elite talent. But I don't think a lot of people expected him to be an All American in year one, And so I feel like it wouldn't be fair to Worthy to put Isaiah Nayer in that same category at this point. Now he could still. I mean, he's coming in as with 12 touchdowns on at his last team. And so he could turn into that. But I feel like it would be a little disrespectful to Xavier Worthy at this point to say they are, toe to toe there. So while it's a huge, huge addition, I don't want to underestimate that at all. I don't want to overlook that. I also agree. I think I have to leave it just for the sheer fact of what Xavier Worthy did last season.
Well, and everyone was also, I'll just throw this in as well. We were all so excited about what Troy O'Meary could bring.
Right.
And then the knee injury and
Mhm.
the big clunky knee brace, and then the aggravation of the knee injury. Look, if for whatever reason Troy O'Meary can't get back to where he was, that compounds the importance of the Isaiah Nayer signing. So, um, you know, I think Texas fans should feel really good about um, Brandon Marion, Steve Sarkisian's ability to reel Isaiah Nayer in, because um, this could end up being a more important signing than we realize right now.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with you. All
All
right.
right, number
Ready for
two.
the next one? Yes, sir. Love it or leave it. TCU edge rusher O'Shawn Mathis is the most important portal target on defense right now for Texas.
Well, man, O'Shawn Mathis is getting a lot of love right now because anytime you have a proven pass rusher in the portal, he's gonna, teams are gonna roll out the red carpet, and there's no doubt that Texas could use O'Shawn Mathis. But I'm gonna leave this as much as if I'm a Texas fan, I'd love to see O'Shawn Mathis come in because honestly, we just didn't see anyone consistently causing havoc in the backfield for Texas. Um, I, I, s- I think if I could find a proven safety with O'Shawn Mathis's pedigree, I'd probably feel more excited about that.
Yeah.
So um, I think he's a really big, important target, and I think they're saving a scholarship for him. And I think his ties to Gary Patterson give Texas a good chance in this one. But I'm going to leave this, Taylor, because I still think Alfred Collins can come on. I still think, you just signed, you know, Jamon Tapp and Jere Bledsoe and some guys who I think are going to be able to start making a difference earlier rather than later. I look at the safety position. Right now, you've got Jaron Thompson and JD Coffee. And look, Jaron Thompson can continue to grow. I always talk about Brandon Jones. Brandon Jones, the light went on for Brandon Jones as a junior, and then he turned into an NFL player,
Yeah.
and that can happen. But man, maybe I still have PTSD from all those plays that were made or not made by Texas safeties last year. So I'm going to leave this one. How
Yeah.
about you?
I mean, I guess it kind of depends. I mean, right now, if they're looking in the portal, who is the safety? Because
Right.
I do agree with you that that is probably of for a position to position, need. I would say safety is ahead of adding an additional, excuse me, edge rusher like O'Shawn Mathis. However, I don't know if that safety is in the portal right now. So for that, I think I'm going to have to say as it currently stands, I'm going to say I have to love it because, O'Shawn Mathis, as you mentioned, he has a relationship with Gary Patterson, thinks highly about him. Texas is in a good position. And while there's absolutely, talent on the Texas defensive front and especially at the edge position, it really hasn't clicked for Texas yet. At least it didn't in 2021. And so it does not hurt to add a proven guy there like an O'Shawn Mathis. Now, if there was a safety in the portal right now that Texas was in the mix for, I would leave this and I would say, yeah, absolutely. I think safety is the where they need to look at right now. But since that really isn't at time of recording this, that really isn't the case. I think I'm gonna have to love it and say for what is available for Texas and who they're in the mix for, that this is probably the most important portal target on defense. However, I would not say that if there was a safety out there because I agree with you. I think safety, I there, yes, I think we both had PTSD from the safety play last year. I mean, I remember coming out of spring, we actually did a staff question, and I like to always go back to these types of things, Chip, during the off season just to see like what we said, what came to fruition, and what didn't. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I did say coming out of spring that Blake Gideon had a tough job because the safety position did not look anywhere near like a leader anywhere near it should look, coming out of spring football. And that ended up coming to fruition, during the 2021 season. It was probably worse, I think, than people expected. But there were some plays by safety, even in the spring game. I remember sitting there watching, being like, "Oh my God, what are they doing?" So it was already a question. And so, now losing both of the, two of the starters, two main contributors in BJ Foster and Brendan Schooler, if they can find an upgrade at that position, I would jump at that too. But all that to say, since right now that is not currently on the table, I'm going to have to love it and say that right now, O'Shawn Mathis is the most important portal target on defense for Texas.
All right, I'll buy that. How about love it or leave it number 3?
All right, let's look at some former Longhorns here. Love it or leave it. Former Longhorns offensive lineman Trey Hopkins and defensive end Alex Okafor will face each other in the AFC Championship game. My love it or leave it for you, Chip, is you had forgotten that Trey Hopkins was on an NFL roster.
You know what? I knew he had signed with the Bengals, but I'll be honest, I had, it slipped that he was their starting center. Maybe it's those long braids he has now that, hang down to below his shoulders. But Trey Hopkins is a great story. And I wrote about this a little bit in the brew because of their matchup in the AFC Championship game, it guarantees Texas will have a former player in the Super Bowl for a 17th straight year. And it's interesting because Trey Hopkins and Alex Okafor, defensive end for the Chiefs, who's already won a Super Bowl with the Chiefs in 2019, were teammates for 3 years at Texas in 10, 11, and 12. And then Okafor moved on, and then Trey Hopkins moved on after the 13 season. Well, Okafor was a 4th round pick, got a nice big, 400 something thousand signing bonus. Trey Hopkins was an undrafted free agent, got $15,000 for his signing bonus, and then made the Bengals roster. They gave him a 3-year deal for $1 million. And so his first season, he makes 300,000, and then they cut him so that they can re-sign him to the practice squad, making a third of what he was making. He hung around, and then got another opportunity really in 2018 when they had injuries on the offensive line. He started 3 different positions that year on the offensive line for the Bengals, and his best position turned out to be center, which is he played tackle and guard at Texas. He never played center. And now they gave him a big contract, a $20 million contract to be their center in 2019. And here he is, Taylor. He and Joe Burrow. Now, you don't want to look at that last game because Burrow got sacked 9 times, but they're moving on, and Trey Hopkins is probably going to go up against Alex Okafor in some way, shape, or form on a stunt or something. And they've taken very different routes to get here, but great story on, for Trey Hopkins to just do whatever it took to stay on that roster.
Yeah. No doubt about it. I'm gonna have to say I'm gonna love it because I forgot that he was on an NFL roster right now. And I will preface this. I really don't pay too close attention to NFL teams. I've never grew up an NFL fan, so the only team I ever really liked was the Detroit Lions because I loved Barry Sanders, and so naturally I'm not going to be a huge diehard NFL fan when the Lions is the team that I was supporting as a child. But in saying that, I think you're right. This is an awesome story. I mean, to go from an undrafted free agent to, getting that contract, then having basically being cut to be demoted, and then now, you're playing hopefully for a spot in the Super Bowl, with the Bengals there. But that's an awesome story, absolutely, and it's fascinating. I literally before we started recording, like, full disclosure here, I forgot that Trey Hopkins was still in the NFL. I honestly didn't even realize that he had been in for probably a few years now. So that's how but again, I don't pay too close attention to the NFL. So that's a big reason why. However, there's no denying that this is huge. And, it's a credit to his perseverance, I think, of anything. I mean, talk about somebody who, has their eye on the prize and goes through the adversity that he went through, didn't get drafted coming out of high school, or excuse me, out of college. And then still being on an NFL roster now. What he left in 2013, so what is it? 8 years
Yeah.
after, yeah. So I mean that's really impressive just to see that story. I love those type of storylines playing out. So kudos to Trey Hopkins, and I apologize for not remembering that you are on the NFL roster right now.
Well, I'm working to get him on the Flagship podcast, so
There we go.
we'll have something to talk about, hopefully, for his sake. Maybe it's during the time leading up to the Super Bowl, but Um, Taylor, great stuff today. Great stuff. And um, yeah, everybody make sure you check out the Todd Dodge interview on the Flagship podcast. Really interesting conversation about everything from, Quinn Ewers to Sam Ellinger and, you know, Todd Dodge, his recruitment, his time at Texas to becoming one of the legendary Texas high school coaches. And what would it take to bring him out of retirement?
Mm.
That's in that interview as well. So, um, for Taylor Estes, I am Chip Brown. We'll see you over at horns247.com. And until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.